statewide with all 58 community colleges and 16 universities. So I've become very passionate about reverse transfer, and I'm looking forward to getting it nationwide with Clearinghouse. I'm going to let each of the panelists introduce themselves, and I don't know, maybe since it was a little difficult in the back, if you guys don't mind standing up so they can at least see your face once, and when you introduce yourself, where you're from, and how you're related to reverse transfer, and maybe where you are in the state, you've gotten started, you've got policies, you've implemented, sort of a quick, and then we'll get into the details after that. Okay?
So I'm Candace Barrington. I'm a faculty member at one of the state universities, but for the last 3.5 years I've been working at the system office for our state universities and community colleges and our online college to develop a transfer program from the community colleges to our state four-year campuses. We instituted.
Can you hold up your microphone, Doctor?
Maybe it's not on. How's that?
Much better.
So we instituted reverse transfer, started reverse transfer policy in 2015, primarily thinking in terms of the needs of our transfer policy. So helping students finish up their programs at the 4 years that they needed from the community college. I'll go into detail about that later, but we're so in the very early stages of this, and it's had a very limited reach for the purpose of it.
Excellent. Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Enright. I'm here from the Community College of Rhode Island, where I'm the Vice President for Student Affairs and Chief Outcomes Officer. Rhode Island, we have one community college and 2 publics. So we are together as 3 institutions, the system, and we're getting started as a system with reverse transfer. So we passed a statewide policy, and Robin McGill from our system office could tell me the exact date, but I would say it was late 2016 or beginning of 2017, and we began awarding our first degrees via reverse transfer in the spring of 2017. So we are really in the early days, but feel like we're off to an exciting start, and I'm happy to speak to that more later.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pat Marshall, Deputy Commissioner for Academic Affairs and Student Success at the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education. We're also very much in the early stages of our policy. It passed the Board of Higher Ed in late 2016. When the Commissioner was charged with implementing our reverse transfer pathway. We've created a portal, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. I also want to recognize the work of our campuses and our MAST team and some key folks at the Department of Higher Ed before we start this afternoon. Elena Quiros-Villanis, who is here, I don't know where Elena is, but she's played a key role in convening our campuses and making sure that we have a policy that works for all 28 undergraduate campuses in the Commonwealth. Allison Little is here. She works on our transfer initiatives. The MAST team, Paul Roberta and Larry Dean, have joined us. And of course, our campuses have been key in helping us to develop the policy and ultimately making it work, which is where the rubber hits the road on our campuses. So thank you.
Hi there, good afternoon. I'm Rosa Rodonnet. I'm the Chief Student Affairs Officer for the University of Maine System. I've been working in transfer issues way before I even came to the University of Maine System, when I was back at the University of Southern Maine doing it for the system. So I've always been involved in these kinds of issues. And then our work with the Maine Community College System, and my colleague, the Chief Academic Officer of Community Colleges, Janet Sorter, is with you and will be on the next panel. But we actually, between our 2 systems, started work on reverse transfer back in about 2015. We went live in fall of 2015. It's still very new. Numbers are pretty darn small. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. It's important to remember in Maine that we don't have one system. The community college system is one system. The University of Maine system is one system. And there's even a little institution called Maine Maritime that's another part of the public system. So we don't have any central authority. This didn't come about as part of any state mandate. We just thought it was a really cool thing to do and important to do for our students, it's been very organic the way it's grown. Again, we started in 2015, and we'll talk a little bit more later about kind of how that's transpired and how that's going.
Great, thank you. So just to make sure everyone's on the same plate. In higher education, there have been traditionally, there are two definitions for reverse transfer, so I just want to make sure everyone understands what we're talking about in context here. And I find the simplest way to explain it is a student starts at the 2-year institution. They transfer to the 4-year institution without a degree. You're taking the coursework that they're earning towards the bachelor's. You're sending that coursework back to the 2-year institution to evaluate and award a degree. And so that's the simplest way to explain it. I'm going to give you a little bit of the national landscape, and then we're going to have some questions for the panelists, and then we'll open it up to all of you for questions. So nationally, there are around 19 states that have legislatively mandated reverse transfer statewide, and there are at least 2 or 3 more who are looking at legislatively mandating, so we're seeing it slowly across the country. In looking at it across the country, I would say probably 75% of the states across the country are doing reverse transfer in some form or fashion. Some it's one-on-one between a community college and a 4-year institution. Some have done it statewide. Some of you may be familiar with the Credit What It's Due grant that went to 15 different states who did do reverse transfer statewide. Some of those were North Carolina, Tennessee, Hawaii, Florida got one, New York, Ohio, Missouri, Michigan. That's all the ones I can think of off the top of my head. But as you can see, there are states around the country who are doing it statewide. And so the other thing at the federal level, one of the key areas that is, I guess some of you might call it a barrier or a challenge, is in order to send those credits back to the 2-year institution, you do have to get the FERPA release or the permission from the student in order to send those credits. And that sometimes has been a challenge, especially for students who are no longer attending the campuses if you're trying to address those students. And so nationally, Indiana and 2 other states got together, and Senator Messer and a few others sponsored a bill to make an exception for reverse transfer for the FERPA release to be able to send the credits back without the FERPA release, but then the 2-year institution would have to get permission from the student to award the degree. The status of that bill, there are many states across the country, system levels, who have signed on publicly to help promote it and back it. And currently it has made it out of committee, and it has been attached to the Higher Education Act. So I don't know where it's going to go from there, as we know this political climate, but I think it's a really great thing that it's come out of committee and is with the Higher Education Act. If anyone is interested in learning more about it, they can see me and I can give you the information of who to contact. ACRO, the National Admissions and Registrars Association, has been spearheading the getting the bill and getting people involved. And so that's just a little bit nationally of where reverse transfer is. And so now I want to open it up and ask some questions of our panelists. So I'd like to start with, what do you see as the benefits of reverse transfer? Sure.
So in 2016, we started offering what we call transfer tickets. They are degrees, they're 4-year degrees that are designed for the students to start at the community college, take 60 credits at the community college, and finish up the final 60 credits at a 4-year institution in our state. These transfer tickets work at all 12 of our community colleges, and they can be received, that same transfer ticket can be received at any one of our 4-year schools. So we've taken that maze of different kinds of articulations, and we reduced it down to 25 or 22 degrees that students can start at the community college, any community college, and finish up at any one of the 4-year schools. Reverse transfer has been important for us because sometimes for various reasons, students are ready to transfer before they finished up that 60 credit degree. Finishing that 60 credit degree though is important because all of the guarantees that come with these 60 credit degrees require the student to finish them. So if they transfer early, reverse transfer allows for them to finish up that degree at the four-year school, transfer those degrees back, and then start getting the benefits of the transfer ticket. And some of the benefits that are not readily apparent here is that we have a block general education that goes across that is doesn't necessarily work very well for the student if they have to go course by course. And they only get the block gen ed if they finish up the degree. So that's where reverse transfer is going to be working for us. We're just in early phases of this, so it's not clear how many students this is going to affect, but we see it as an important aspect of it. And I'm one of the co-managers of this. The other co-manager, Kim Kluchnik, is going to be talking in the other group. The next group will give you more details about how all this works. One of the problems, do you want problems too?
Yeah, sure, go ahead. I have it in there.
One of the issues that are having to deal with is if a student comes over with 45 credits from the community college to the four-year school, how long do they have to finish up those remaining 15 credits and still have those benefits? So this, there's certain benefits that accrue with having the transfer ticket. If they haven't finished that transfer ticket and on a timely basis, how long do we keep that transcript open for them in that way? And then the other one is just, how do we make sure students know that it's an option that's available to them? And so those are the two main roadblocks that we've encountered and that we're working on. Our registrar from one of the four-year schools is here, and she probably could give me a list of about 10 more roadblocks. But we'll start with those two.
Excellent, thanks Candace. So the benefits, I guess I would start with the benefits to the students. Here's what we know about our students at the Community College of Rhode Island. We transfer out more than 1,000 students each year. Out of those roughly 1,000 students, only 23% are transferring with a degree today. So 77% of our students are transferring out. They have some credits, but they still have a path to go toward a degree. So for those students, the opportunity of reverse transfer represents two things. It represents a milestone in their educational experience that spurs them to continue. It also represents real earning power. When we look at the time to bachelor's degree completion, even for those students who are bachelor's degree completers, it's taking them very real time. 6 years post-transfer, we see somewhere just north of 50% of those students have a bachelor's degree. Now, some of those students are just ticking along. Some of those students are, have left the four-year institution. But for all of them, an associate's degree is a meaningful credential, and it has value in the workplace. So that's significant. For our institution, it's significant for the same reason. We're working very hard to get that 23% up higher. But as we do that, we want to know that we are tracking the remaining 77%. And that we're being thoughtful about giving them all we can. So to be able to offer up something which is, hey, we know you transferred with 16 credits, and we know you're still just a couple terms in at Rhode Island College or University of Rhode Island, but here's something that we can offer up as a system that's going to keep you going and provide you with some strength along the way. So for the students and sort of for us to feel like an institution that's doing our very best to serve our students, it's powerful. I'd also say as a state, we're hustling like most states. I think Lumina laid out this challenge of attainment goals, and we're all trying to trump one another with what's your state's attainment going to be. So our goal in Rhode Island is 70%, and I think that's a good, strong, aspirational goal. It's meaningful, it's the right thing to do. And if we're going to get there with any urgency, we're going to have to start awarding credentials, and we're not going to be able to wait around to figure out how we get every single person a bachelor's degree by next year. We're going to have to start people with real stackable credentials, and an associate's degree is a powerful way to do that. When we look at the number of jobs in our labor market in Rhode Island that demand some sort of post-secondary credential, you can get labor market folks and economists to debate whether the number is 60% or 70%, or some people will say it's in the 50s, but it's a high number. It's the majority of jobs that exist and are being created. require some post-secondary credentials. So when there are opportunities for us to award those, even for people who are making progress, let's find a way to award them. So the benefits are real. I think the challenges that Candace spoke to are very real as well. I think what we've found, we are really not yet a year into this journey. We have awarded 65 degrees, which we feel like is a good early momentum. We've looked a lot at El Paso and their trajectory, and they won an Excellencia Award for the El Paso Community College UTEP Reverse Transfer Partnership. They awarded 28 in their first year. So we feel good about 65, and we know the way that you get sort of hockey stick growth and go into the hundreds is you've got to automate it. So that's what we're looking at today. There are really three different populations that we've found as we have launched this. Now, when I say we, I really mean the folks on the ground. I look at Jude Tomasino out here, who's been doing the heavy lifting within our records office at the community college. We have learned an enormous amount, and that has come through the efforts of the folks who are in those records offices, comparing transcripts, talking to students, sending out letters, fielding calls. So there's a lot of work in early learning to be done to figure out even kind of what do we need to fix and change here. But I think we need to think differently about the strategies for a few different populations. First, there's the kind of look-back population. You can put a FERPA consent on one's application, but if someone applied to the 4-year 8 years ago, and you know they're a stop out, you've got to go out and find them. So we know there are thousands of Rhode Islanders who are out there somewhere who ought to be either at the associate's degree point or very close. It's been a real challenge finding those individuals. We've sent out a lot of letters. We've shared letters that we've sent to Rhode Island College and University of Rhode Island. They've mailed out on our behalf. We've done an enormous amount of outreach. That's been a tricky population for us to find, and I'm not sure we've quite figured that out yet. The other population are the students who are somewhere along their 4-year journey and they're still attached to that 4-year. I think we're doing better with that population today. I will say that we had to get over an initial hurdle with our 4-year partners who have been amazing partners, but I think their initial gut reaction was, we don't want you kind of taking our students. If someone gets an associate's degree, are they going to then feel like that's it and they're good and they can stop out in their bachelor's degree progress? And I think we used national data at the outset to say that's not an issue. And I think when we look at the 65 individuals, it hasn't been an issue at all. In fact, it's been quite the contrary. But with that population, it was, we need to assure the 4 years that this isn't about sort of, in some way, shape, or form, stealing their students. I think the population that we get excited about and is all about how do we automate this and make it more streamlined, those are the go-forward students. We know this spring and every spring we'll be looking at 700 or 800 students who transfer out before they get their degree, and that's how do we make sure that when they request a transcript, they're getting information about reverse transfer. When they apply to one of our 4-year partners, they're getting information to opt into reverse transfer. So I think the future is about partnership with our 4 years and streamlining and automating the process as much as we possibly can.
So Sarah, to let the audience know, from the states that did credit when it's due and did it statewide, a part of the grant was research. And the research has shown that the students who've gotten the degree through reverse transfer, the associate's degree, that increased the retention of that student population at the university anywhere from bachelor's degrees, anywhere from 5 to 18% in some of those states. So we've seen that, as I think it was Candace said, that it is really a milestone for those students and it's making a difference for them, yes. Mm-hmm. Questions, yeah. We've got 3 panel questions and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions.
So I'm trying to figure out, ditto. Can you hear me? Okay. So I had structured this in terms of benefits to students, institutions, employers, and the state of Massachusetts. Obviously, it's a real milestone for students to earn a degree. So I think the effective or psychological boost that gives students is really important. As they also have the opportunity to add a credential to their resume, which gives them more opportunities for promotion and pay increases at work. So that was on my list as well. As far as students who are pursuing their bachelor's degrees, sometimes that process gets interrupted. So getting the associate's degree helps them in case they're not able to finish the bachelor's degree, and it gives them the credential to fall back on. As far as Massachusetts in particular, students who are in associate's degrees here in the state gain an estimated net income of over $250,000, an average increase of more than $6,000 per year. So that goes back to the increased credential for them. Over 40 years of employment would be the $250,000. And students also benefit from fees that are associated with transcripts being sent back and forth and graduation as well. As far as the benefits to institutions, obviously our community colleges benefit from increased graduation rates. And I would say that reverse transfer agreements can also contribute to improved or strengthened relationships between our community colleges and four-year institutions. Employers also gain the opportunity to hire more credentialed workers, and I have some information on the tax revenue that is generated, the potential for increased tax revenue. So in the state of Massachusetts, we gain an estimated income of more than $68,000 from taxes of associate's degree wage earners over the course of their work lives compared to students who earn only a high school diploma. So I'll let you go ahead and try to figure out what's left to say.
Not much. No, I mean, I say a lot of ditto. From the perspective of Maine, you know, actually, I'm going to go a couple of different directions. I want to also kind of reconfirm something that you just said, and that's building the relationship between the community colleges and the university system. That's an enormous benefit for the state, and an enormous benefit for our students, obviously, and for our two systems. Also, I have two colleagues from the University of Maine system here from our University of Southern Maine campus and University of Maine. They may be able to give you some insight into some of the barriers as we go forward. I do want to speak a little bit from the perspective of Maine around the attainment initiative. You know, we all know, many of us are states that are receiving the wonderful benefits of Lumina funding, either on statewide attainment initiatives or, in our case as well, the Health Promise initiative. And in Maine, we currently have a state attainment rate of credential or degree of about 42 to 43%. 43% if you include the credentials that aren't very well counted, the under degree credential. And our goal is 60. We saw 70 and almost fainted. In Maine, that would be crazy. And 60 for us is unbelievably aspirational. And it's by 2025, of course. And of course, for us, about 200,000 of Maine citizens are adults who have some college but no degree. And so when you think about reverse transfer, and you think about what you're speaking about statewide and nationally, looking at that is going to be a very, very, very important part of state attainment initiatives. If you want to maximize the number of credentialed citizens in your state to achieve, even begin to achieve, the attainment goal that you've set for your state. So obviously for us in Maine, reverse transfer plays a critical role in our overall state attainment initiative. I'd also just echo, you know, that obviously we all know the data. You mentioned it again. You know, students who earn their associate degrees and are pursuing a bachelor's are far more likely to persist and complete. And that's the benefit for our institutions. In Maine, we have a system, and this is just University of Maine system. In the University of Maine system, our aggregate completion rate is about 50%. And that varies. There's an enormous variation in there between our 7 institutions. We need to do better, and we can do better, and having more students be retained, have benchmarks along the way, stackable credentials along the way, are part of why reverse transfer is so very, very important. On the barrier side, again, my colleague would probably chime in with even more. Automation, I would echo automation. Being able to really adequately track these students is going to be really important. Outreach is huge. I don't think we've cracked that nut yet by any scope of the imagination. You know, I'm wondering now about opt-in, opt-out. I think that one of our challenges has been an ever-changing staff at a lot of our institutions, and so it's hard to sustain momentum. I bet you hear that everywhere. And the other challenge, and again, I'm sure all of us encounter this, is that if a student comes to University of Maine system and they were in a technical program, we use that as an example at community colleges, they're going to, the higher likelihood is that they may be able to reverse transfer into an associate of arts program, not necessarily that technical program that they were originally enrolled in. And so figuring out what does that completion mean, what's the best interest of the student from a reverse transfer perspective, I think will be part of our challenge going forward. So
You're all officially hired to go on the road with me and present. Taking it back to one little thing that I would like to, some of what they're talking about, to bring you back to the student perspective. When I was in North Carolina doing this, my universities, when we first started, said who's going to answer all the questions to the students. And while we were developing an FAQ website, we know they still want to call and email and so forth. And so 15,000 students got my email address. And so I answered a lot of student questions. And what really brought it home for me and made me become passionate to do this nationwide was the feedback from the students and what it meant for them to get the degrees and how it changed their lives. And when we announced that we had topped 1,000 degrees in North Carolina, I got a phone call one day from a student. And she was working at a community college. She had started at a different community college, transferred to the university, and stopped out. And she said to me, I know I have all the right credits to get my degree. I want to do this. And we were mainly doing currently enrolled because that's what most people do. I said, okay, I'll walk you through how to do it on your own. All I ask is you call me back and let me know if you got it and what it meant to you. So she called me back at the end of the semester, and she did get her degree. And who can tell me what it meant to her? There's one particular thing that they said up here that was huge, that made a difference in her life. Can anybody tell me? Pay. She got an increase in her job. And she actually said that she was considering going back now that she was making more money to be able to get her bachelor's degrees. And that was just so empowering to me to want to be able to make sure this is nationwide. So we know there's a lot of challenges with reverse transfer. And when I was reviewing all of your states, you've all gone down the path of policies. And there's a lot of policies and procedures that need to be looked at to implement reverse transfer successfully. So my next question for you is, can you tell me a couple of those policies that have been challenging or easy and why they were looked at for reverse transfer? And we'll start on the other end and come back this direction.
Well, again, we don't have a state policy. I'm going to keep reminding us of that. It's between two systems. I think that, I hate to say it, but for us, because it was two systems, relatively small state, relatively small number of cases, policy issues weren't that big. I think the thing we struggled through the most, and again, Sharon and Chris, you guys chime in, because I think Sharon, she might have been part of these conversations, was dealing with the verbal piece. And how are we really going to figure out when this, can we just opt it? Can they opt out? And then we can just go ahead and move this stuff forward? Or do we need to be more overt and more intentional about the whole verbal piece? Where we finally landed, I guess, with the automation piece, is we have a great form, and the student can sign off. We need to automate that kind of stuff. So I'd say for us, that was one of our biggest challenges. And again, I do think at this stage, from a policy perspective, the opt-in, opt-out is a piece that we really need to look at and think about. And I also think that this question of what's the right degree, when they're at a stage where they have enough credits to do the reverse transfer, what does that mean? Is it the original degree? Is it any degree? And I'm not sure we've been as clear about that for the student as we could be.
So the policy that went through the Board of Higher Ed was a very high-level policy, and we're now working on implementation. And of course, in the conversations with our campuses, one of the issues that came up and has come up from the panelists is the workload issue for our institutions. So we actually have automated or are working on automating our reverse transfer through a portal, which is basically a database, an information hub, communication hub for our institutions. So students submit an application to the hub, to the portal, and then it allows the institutions to communicate with one another regarding the student's status, credits, etc. So I think that that is an example of the workload issue, which is one of the barriers and one of the solutions that we were able to come up with. So I think it's always challenging and exciting to get creative institutions to work together on a policy. So that alone, and again, I want to thank Elena and the MAS team for leading those conversations over the course of a year that got us to a statewide policy. So I think that's about all I have to say on that. So Sarah.
Sure. I would say similar to Massachusetts, Rhode Island passed a policy that was fairly general and high level. I think the power of that was it catalyzed activity. So policy led to partnership, policy led to discussions, and policy made it happen. I think the policy, if I were to go back and read it, says something as simple as like, there will be reverse transfer in the state of Rhode Island. And it doesn't dictate much more than that. I think what it did was bring us together with a concrete goal and focus. I think like any policy, we learn through the doing, we learn through the partnership, and we could probably name some things that we'd like to see. For example, and we'll get here through partnership anyway, but I think that if both of the public four-year institutions had an incentive or a push to embed reverse transfer in their application process for every incoming transfer student, that in and of itself would automate a lot. But I think we're getting there on our own. So I guess what I would say is having a policy is better than not having one. Our state is small enough that with 3 public institutions, we've had good luck just sort of coming together around this. I do think that the resource constraint is very real, and that's probably less a policy issue and more just kind of a budgetary issue at a state level, that if you really want to get transformational outcomes in something like this, it's not just going to magically happen on its own. It's going to happen because people are spending time and effort thinking about how to make it work, and investing in technology and systems to do so. So I think probably we have fewer thoughts on how we change the policy and more thoughts on where we could make investments if there were resources there.
The policy in our system is just within our system, and it doesn't include the University of Connecticut. So that's a large chunk that's not included. Nevertheless, the policy itself is fairly granular, but that doesn't mean it's being applied uniformly across our 17 institutions. And I think probably we're now at the point where we need to bring all the registrars together in one room and talk about how this is being done and find both ways to automate it and to think about data so that we're all collecting the same data and we can talk to one another about it.
Okay, thank you. Oh,
I was just going to add that we are working with our four-year institutions to add language to the applications, so it would be more of an opt-in model, but I like the idea of an opt-out model.
okay, thank you. So on the policy front, across the nation, the states who have legislatively mandated have typically kept it higher level. You'll do reverse transfer. Some have gone a little more detailed, but where the successes have come from is when the state institutions have gotten together to look at the policies when they're graduating students, mainly on the community college side. So to give some examples, some of the policies that you have to look at is, does a student have to be readmitted? And when? If they've been out for 3 years, typically standard policies are you got to be readmitted. Does the student have to go through all the graduation processes and pay all those fees and things like that? Most institutions waive that and allow the students to go through the process and get it for free. Another one that you guys pointed out is, what type of degree do you give the student? What's the right degree, and do they even have all the right credits to get it? So a lot of those kinds of things we've seen in the data and the research, especially from the credit when it's due states, that those who came together and had consistent policies across the state tend to have more degrees, students who get degrees. And on the opt-in, opt-out language, that's on the FERPA release. And I usually try not to get into that because the definition of opt-in, opt-out can vary across the country. What the Department of Education has said, and for those of you who know Leroy Rooker, a lot of people call him the FERPA guru, what the Department of Education has said is that the student does have to give permission. It has to be some kind of active way. Also, which is why the Reverse Transfer Efficiency Act is being gone through Congress, because it can't be changed without getting it through. So one more question, then we'll open up to the audience. I know 2 of you have implemented, and you've got some small numbers. Is there anything else you would like to add now that you've implemented as some lessons learned? Or anything else before we open it up to the audience?
Well, I think there are 2 really important issues. Assessment, and we've been able to put flags in our HARE system, which is our statewide data system, to be able to track in the future how many students are taking advantage of the reverse transfer option. So I think it's important to have baseline metrics so that we can demonstrate progress when it comes to the number of students who are availing themselves of the reverse transfer. The other issue is marketing, and again, this has come up over and over again, getting the word out to students that this is an option. And in earlier panels today, we talked about equity, and I think that this is an issue of equity for our community college students who are our most underrepresented students in higher ed. And, I really think the marketing campaign around this needs to be one of our next steps in Massachusetts.
Okay.
I would just echo the piece on marketing and branding in a sense. I mean, it's not dissimilar to someone who is sharing, meta majors, that's what we call them, but for students, we call them career communities. I think we're in a similar place with reverse transfer where it means plenty to us, but as we try to sell and promote this to students, it's a confusing label at times because we've heard, no, I don't want to go back to community college right now. Like I'm slowly chugging along at Rhode Island College. So trying to convey, no, you don't actually have to transfer back here. You just send us your transcript and we'll get your credits back here. We'll award you a degree. So we're grappling with kind of what's the right branding, what's the right name, and how do we get some of those student stories really at the fore so that students are able to while many of us may learn through data, data and stories put together are much more powerful, and I think we're still working on gathering the stories and putting them forward in a way that they're going to resonate with students.
I just want to add one last one, because I think we'd all be remiss if we didn't have it on the table, and that's as you pull these together, and I know as I'm reflecting on the work we've done, don't forget your student records and transfer officers. They're on the road, they're on the ground, they're doing work. It can't just be a top-down kind of thing. We need to find ways to get them together more regularly, between systems, so that needs to happen in Maine. And we really can't forget that critical piece of this puzzle, because that group is gonna help all of us figure out how to make this work.
I would echo that. In North Carolina, instead of like a task force typically done at state levels, we actually got teams from every one of the campuses for the pilots. We didn't do all 58 teams. I did 15 pilot institutions who established those policies and procedures for the rest of the community colleges. And we got teams from the universities, and we had all those crucial people. And I believe North Carolina is sustainable, what they've done, and I believe it's that way because all those people were in the room and came up with the best solutions of how to deal with reverse transfer. So let me open it up to the audience for questions for the panel.
Sarah, you had mentioned the reverse transfer campaigns that you're working on, and you had touched a little bit upon mailings that you were doing to prospective reverse transfer beneficiaries. And I'm curious, how are you determining who to target for that? If they're not presently enrolled anywhere, and how do you size that out, and what exactly are you doing?
We've worked in partnership with our two state four-years, so Rhode Island College and the University of Rhode Island, to identify criteria. Sort of together we've said, well, anyone who is coming to you with 15 or more credits from CCRI, and probably not someone who's just started with you, but someone who has both 15 or more from CCRI, 60 or more from your institution, and has been engaged in the last 10 years, whether they're with you or they're not. So they were able to pull from their student information system lists, and then we generated a joint letter from, I believe it was from both presidents ultimately that we landed on, and students received a letter from both presidents saying there is this opportunity and it appears that you might be a fit, and take these steps if you're interested.
Is that where you got the majority of your 65?
It is, yeah, that's our start. We're still figuring out, those are fairly significant investments of time and energy, so we're still figuring out how well did that work, how do we target the population with a finer point, and with what regularity will we do that. But certainly it helped get us off to a start.
Other questions?
I have a question. I can't remember who mentioned this, but it was mentioned that students at wherever it was are able to go back and then once they get the degree, the associate's degree, then avail of the benefits. So I know in Massachusetts, we want to keep students in the state system, so we don't want to give the financial benefit. Students are not eligible for the financial benefit. So I was wondering if that's one of the benefits. Does that exist? And if so, are students who do reverse transfer, are they given that financial benefit? Or is that not part of it?
So let me repeat the question and make sure that we have it correct. You're asking, once the student gets the associate's degree through reverse transfer, what are some of the benefits? And you gave an example of the general education curriculum that typically they get benefits from, and you're also asking about some financial benefits. When you say financial, are you talking about scholarships or financial aid or?
In Massachusetts, the students who transfer in with the associate's degree, if they meet various criteria, they can free the tuition waiver.
Okay, so tuition waivers, okay.
Right, but we don't allow students who get the degree via reverse transfer, we don't give them a benefit, nor do we give them gen ed block.
Okay.
So I was wondering how that works.
We don't have tuition waivers.
That's all.
Anyone else like to address it?
We haven't done that in Rhode Island. So in Rhode Island, we do have a joint admissions agreement whereby students who earn the associates and then go on to URI or RAPE do have eligibility for tuition discounts, but we have not coupled that with reverse transfer.
So I will answer it from the national perspective. Many of the credit when it's due states did give the benefits of the general education. Because if you look at some of the students through reverse transfer, especially the ones who are 1 or 2 classes away, a lot of times we see that. And they've transferred because they need to be full-time to get financial aid and they didn't get the degree. So they have already, except for 1 or 2 classes, pretty much met the gen ed course. So a lot of them did give those benefits. To my knowledge, I haven't researched the financial aspect. I don't think anyone that I know of has retroactively given like a scholarship, because normally there are transfer scholarships and things like that or a waiver. But it's a great question. I'm definitely going to look into it. Yes, in the back.
Have any of you thought about how moving from the 2-year to the 4-year sectors in your states presents the opportunity to blur the lines between institutions? Meaning, you're not owning them, you're not thinking about your own 2-year institution or 4-year institution, but you're thinking of the student as a student enrolled in public higher education in your state, so that whatever academic completion and credential completion they attain along the way is all contained within their enrollment within public higher education. It's a bit psychological, it's a bit abstract, but I'm wondering if it's a way to help students see that there is linkage, there are alignments, and the credentials all fit together. And there's less of this, I don't want to go back to that school anymore. Well, you don't have to go back to that school. That school is part of us, and what you're doing still fits.
I'm going to answer that in 2 or 3 ways. One of the things we know is that our students already see us as all part of one thing, and they don't understand why things don't work better. So they already see us that way. The problem is that we don't see our students that way. And one of the things we've tried to do is just change that pronoun from your students to my students to our students. So we, as a system of 17 campuses, we have 50,000 or 40,000 students. They're our students, whether I'm teaching at one of the 4 years or at one of the 2 years. They belong to all of us. And so by developing these common curricula across the 17 campuses, we've articulated that more clearly, not only for the students, but also for the rest of us. And not just faculty, but everybody, right? It's important that student affairs understand that these are our students, that the people in the business offices understand these are our students. And that's a really important point that, especially when we have these systems like us, we go from 2 years, 4 years, all in one system, that we can think of our students that way, to their benefit. It's not detracting from anybody by doing that, I don't think.
And I think that in Massachusetts, the more that we're able to create a seamless system of transfer, whether it's through our foundation, our general education foundation, our STEM foundation, our mass transfer pathways, which now include over 40 disciplines, our work with the Commonwealth Commitment, and hopefully looking at dual admissions. I think we're sending the signal to our students that they're part of the system, and it's one system. Like Candace said, there are students.
And I would add to that, and I don't know, Doug, if there's data on this, but at least in my experience in Tennessee and North Carolina, we saw many students who were consistently multiply enrolled in more than one institution at the same time. Especially in North Carolina, I remember seeing some of the students when we were looking at the data, they were actually enrolled in 3 at one time. I had a student one time at Middle Tennessee State University when I worked there who literally drove from Murfreesboro to downtown Nashville to somewhere else to get the classes he needed from all 3 institutions so he could graduate because he worked and he couldn't get the classes when he needed them. 3 institutions and drove at least an hour every day to get to those different classes. So we're seeing what the students, like you said, that's how they see it, but we don't see it. I don't know, Doug, is there any numbers on that?
They're 5 or 6 years old, though. We haven't done it recently.
Okay. Here.
I'd just like to ask from a policy standpoint, with this forward and reverse transfer, when the structure is then funded by headcount, then the incentive for some institutions is not that it's ours, because in the structure of a lot of budget reductions, people want to hold, or institutions, not individual people, may want to hold on to those students because they're going to get their funding based on that headcount or that FTE. And I just want to know if there's any experience that you had where that kind of came up in some type of way that you have presented this in terms of how that is. It is ours, and I get it's ours, but for at the institutional level, it really can come down to a funding.
Does anyone on the panel? Okay.
Sure, I'd say there's a both and from our perspective at the community college, less so on the financial side, more just sort of what's in our students' best interest. We know we have too many students who transfer before they earn a degree and do not see success. So we certainly institutionally have a push to have more students complete before they leave our institution. We also know we're at 23%. So if we triple that tomorrow, we're still going to have 33% of our transfer out students who do not have a degree. So I think, there may be institutions that have fundamentally different statistics than ours, though I think we're sort of in the ballpark of where most community colleges are. I think it's just our reality and our truth, and to ignore it is going to be ignoring a significant student population kind of at almost any community college.
And when you talk about all the different benefits of reverse transfer, to me, those outweigh that. And the other thing I guess I would say, if you will look across the country, there's this word called performance funding that is truly going across the nation. More and more states, I don't know. John, Doug, do either one of you know the number of states who are doing performance funding? I know there's at least 2 that are completely performance funding, which is Tennessee and Indiana. And then I want to say it's close to like 30 or 40 states who have some kind of performance funding, and more every day. So I can see that could be a possibility of changing. I don't know if any of the New England states are discussing performance funding or not. You're nodding your head, yes.
Robin, did we approve our performance funding measures last night, or we approve them next week? So yeah, we're right there in Rhode Island, and I think all it points in the right direction, which is how do we serve our students, whether they're getting degrees at our institution or somewhere else in the system. I think that the vast majority of our metrics line up with that goal. So wherever our students are getting degrees, they will be counted and meaningful, both on the student side and on the sort of revenue side.
So I think I saw one more hand. I have time for one more question, and then I'm going to wrap it up.
This is a fast question. I'm assuming a community college transfer student is not eligible for reverse transfer unless they previously met the residency requirement of the community college?
That is one of the policies, yes, that they have to discuss. The residency policy, nationally for all the accrediting bodies, it's 25%. So for a traditional 60 credit, it's 15 hours. There are different institutions in state that sometimes have different residency requirements that over and above that 25%. We've seen in the states that have done it statewide that they've made the policy at the state level to adhere to just the 25%. I don't know if you guys, everybody's 25%, okay? So I got just a few minutes to wrap it up. I want to point out some things in your folder. You have a flyer from the National Student Clearinghouse on reverse transfer. We are automating reverse transfer as much as possible nationally, And one of the great things about ours is that we can help you cross those private, public, and state lines with reverse transfer. And so if you're interested in participating with the clearinghouse and have more questions, feel free to contact me. My information is at the bottom. The other thing I would like to offer to all of you is, as I've been working with this for about 6 years now, I have been going across the country in some states and doing state level trainings on all the policies and procedures. And I commend you guys for all these states getting together and working on transfer, because I find it amazing, like what Wichie's doing with the passport, because traditionally states have not worked together across those state lines. And so we know those students swirl a lot. So if you're interested in working with the clearinghouse or having some trainings, I'd be more than happy to help you. You have another flyer in your folder. This is courtesy of the Research Center. And you'll see those numbers you were talking about. This is 10 years worth of data for your state, looking at what we call the potential completers. And as Doug pointed out earlier, these students have completed at least 2 years of full-time enrollment. They've transferred at least once. So they have the potential to get reverse transfer. Now, when we ran this report, we looked 10 years back, so not all the students are still enrolled. There are some still enrolled, but some are not. And none of these students have gotten degrees. So they all have the potential for reverse transfer for the associate's degrees. And if you look, you'll notice that we have other states on there. So I'm looking at Connecticut at the moment, where you see the starting cohort. That's the cohort for the whole 10 years. The next number has the Connecticut first, and so whatever state you're at, that's how many stayed in Connecticut. All the rest of the students below there transferred out to another state. And then on the other side, the same thing as all the students transferring into your state from all the other states. And these numbers are pretty staggering. When we looked at it nationally, thousands upon thousands of students have the potential for reverse transfer. And so it's important for us to look at in order to get those completion goals that we're talking about. Any other, let's see, am I on time? I got maybe like a few more minutes if there are any other questions. As far as the reverse transfer platform of the clearinghouse, where we are nationally, we're working with about 31 different states, either individually with institutions, at the state system level, or completely at the state level. Ohio has signed on statewide, Iowa has signed on statewide, Alabama has signed on statewide. We're just getting contracts in on Louisiana and Kentucky. New York is coming on. So if you think about it, the one thing that I talk to all of these institutions whenever they participate is we've got to cross those state lines if we're going to get the numbers. And there's one population that all of us work with in some form, fashion, or another that breaks my heart when I work with them personally that really could benefit from this. And what population is that? Military. If you look at military transfer students, they have 3 and 4 and 5 transcripts, and they don't have a degree. In North Carolina, when we were working with the students, I saw many students who had over 140 total credits, and we couldn't give them an associate's degree. And John mentioned one of those reasons, and most of you said the reason earlier when we looked at the data. And what is it? Math. The other thing that we looked at with the students that, because we looked at all the students who had the potential for reverse transfer, one of the other barriers on the STEM side is we noticed that a lot of the humanities and social sciences were the ones they weren't completing in order to get the degree. So it's something to think about. So if we get this nationwide, I truly believe we can make a difference for those students that are crossing those state lines and losing those credits and not getting a degree. All right. Thank you very much.